Hey, what's going on, guys? I thought I'd talk this morning about one of those things that preachers get asked about pretty regularly is where do you get all those sermon ideas? So that's what we're going to talk about today on Help Me Preach. Okay, so when it comes to sermon ideas, there are tons of sermons all over the place, but yet sometimes it's kind of hard to get those sermons figured out and what you want to use. And so one thing I've talked about already is the preaching calendar, and so that's really important. And one thing kind of within that Mark talked about is the hot topic folder. And so you're going through, and as you have ideas, you take that, you throw it into some type of folder, and then whenever you go and you plan your sermons out, hey, there you go. But let me give you 7 places that will help you to generate some ideas, and maybe you've got other ones that would be good. And so kind of as a community, I think it's good for people to kind of give some places and suggestions and that kind of thing. So let's start off with something really quick. The first thing I'd say is to keep a notepad with you when you're doing your daily Bible reading. I know for me, there's been plenty of times where you're reading, you're studying and all that kind of thing, and then boom, there's an idea right there. And you may even have the 3 points or 5 or whatever you want to have. It's just right there. And so you just have a notepad, put it in Evernote. I have them on my phone, those kind of things. I think those are really, really helpful to just, take those ideas down. Because one of the things that you'll notice throughout this video is that I'm encouraging you to write it down while it's with you. Because it's very easy to have an idea and then it's gone. Here's the thing as well. If you are not reading, if you're not doing daily Bible reading, I've got a video about devotions, and so you need to be doing those. You need to be having a daily Bible reading plan of some sort. A friend of mine a long time ago talked about how you can't constantly give to other people if you're not filling yourself up. And so your material will dry up, your content, even your spirituality, you'll get frustrated and all that if you're not filling yourself up and enjoying what you're doing. All right, so the second thing is to read books. Now, usually for me, this is self-help. So books like Essentialism and other ones. And so I've talked about these already. But those are usually filled with a lot of biblical principles, but that's not all that you have to read. For example, you may read some C.S. Lewis, for example, or you might read some other type of, maybe a person that believes in God that has religious principles, and you may kind of expose yourself to a lot of different ideas. But again, as you're reading those different books across the spectrum of whatever you're interested in, just make sure that you have some type of process for writing things down, that you have a way of remembering those ideas. Otherwise, again, it's going to come in and it'll just go right back out. All right, number 3 is actually to listen to other people's sermons and classes. So I can't tell you how many times I've sat in the middle of a sermon and he's got one point or one idea that he just kind of hits on, and I'm like, hey, that'd be a sermon in of itself. And maybe it's in a class. I remember I've got a sermon, I may do it pretty soon, it's on the Rechabites. And that actually was a sermon that I made from sitting in a class where they talked about the Rechabites. And I wanted to do it different. There was a lot of information that was really good in that class, but I wanted to kind of organize it differently and that kind of thing. And so anyway, I got a sermon out of that. So the thing is, it's what you'll notice with all of this, if you're having trouble getting things out, you've got to be putting stuff in. Now, one thing I want to say on that is just give credit if you have something where you're using someone else's material. Maybe it's a good sermon or something like that. There's nothing wrong with using someone else's material. You want to just be careful not to stunt your own growth, and you need to make sure that you're making it your own, and that you're not just taking everything from somebody else. I mean, everybody has their own particular illustrations and those types of things, and you need to just be careful about all that kind of thing. So it's way too easy with the internet, and we need to be careful not to do that. And I'm not saying I've never done that before or fallen into that problem, but you have to be careful about that kind of thing. All right, number 4 is sermon books. So this is kind of one of those, it's a help, and the reason that they're written is for people to share and to use this information, and there's a lot of value in that, especially if you're young, because you've got people that are talking about topics that you need to talk about, but maybe you've never written a sermon on, and so you have some ideas. Now, again, this is kind of like listening to someone else's class material or their sermons, is that you don't want to have something that should be a help ultimately become a crutch. And so I'm not saying you can't ever use a sermon out of a sermon book, but again, you have to be very careful about how you use that. Again, this is from personal experience and things that I needed to do better and that type of thing. But use those as ideas. Or maybe there's ideas that they bring up, make it your own, do something different with it. Or maybe there's something they bring up that you can make into a completely different sermon. So that's a good place to start. Now, another thing, and I learned this from one of the preacher workshops that I went to, is to retrain your eyes. Is that there are literally illustrations just all over the place of how we can communicate and how we can illustrate truths. I mean, this is what Jesus did over and over, is that he would make whole parables of things that they would see on a normal daily basis. That's what the parable of the sower is here's a normal illustration. Or you have Matthew 18, here's the unforgiving servant. And so these are common scenarios, yet he's elaborating on them. And so we just need to kind of think about some of the normal illustrations in daily life that we have and to consider those. All right, so number 6 is to listen to your people. And so the church where you're at, if you're not spending time with the members, first off, that's a big problem. And so you've got some things that you need to correct. Maybe I can talk about that in another video. But as you talk to people, they'll A, tell you things that they're struggling with, or B, things that the church is struggling with, or things that they're interested in. I mean, there's all kinds of things. So as you talk with people, just make sure you have an ear to kind of consider some of those things. Now, here's the other side of this, though. You want people to be able to trust you. And so what that means is, if they tell you something, they need to know you're not going to just run to the pulpit and talk about it. And that's not a very good thing. But if you're knowing that there's things that would help them, or I remember I've got a sermon, and this was one that I really, really enjoyed. It was basically on how you deal with older age. And the reason this lesson came about was because I was talking with some of our older members, particularly one, as he was talking about, getting older and that kind of thing. And I thought about it, and I did a sermon on it. And I feel like it was one of those ones that was really helpful. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, is it wasn't a sermon preaching at him, but it was ideas that would help him and encourage him and a lot of other people in that particular season of life. All right, so here's number 7. The last one is preaching things that you need. So a lot of times you may have a sermon that you need or you're interested in and that kind of thing. And usually what happens is if you need it, probably somebody else needs it out there in the congregation. And that's not an unusual thing. Now, I do just have kind of a bit of a warning with that, is that you can sit there and talk about things that interest you and that help you, but yet are not connecting to your audience. So you need to be very careful about that. There are plenty of things that you can talk about that are beneficial to you. You just have to make sure that you're intentional about relating them to other people. Also, be careful about confession sermons. Even though you need to make sure that you want to communicate ideas and to show humility and that you're not a perfect person, all that kind of thing, just those things may be okay from time to time, and if you don't get into a lot of detail, but you don't want to completely undermine your work and have your audience wondering what's going on here with this type of person. So anyway, those are some things that I had, and I'd really like some input from someone if you've got ideas for how you go about your sermons and getting your ideas. Maybe you have other suggestions. I'd be glad to hear those. Anyway, hopefully those are helpful. And so if you like this video, hit the like button, share it with your friends, subscribe if you haven't already. Appreciate the support so far, and we'll catch up with you later. If you have any other ideas that you would like to hear about, shoot me a message, and we'll catch up with you later.